So real quick, I want to cover what we know from human research is the pillars of brain health. And the reason I have nutrition highlighted there is because in veterinary medicine, that is the area where we have the most amount of actual robust research. We don't have, by far, we don't have enough. It's still very early days, but at least we have some. Some of these other pillars, we're still just starting to dabble in it. And to Sonali's point, it sounds like she's going to be talking to folks that are starting to do that kind of research, which is fantastic. But we know from research done in humans that if you want to stay healthy with cognition and just your brain health as you get older, then you have to look at things like nutrition. You have to remain active, and you have to remain enriched and socialized. People, we know from research done in people, and that loneliness will definitely cause or increase the chance for cognitive failure. And you have to be learning. You know, I always tell, like I said, I used to teach, I always tell my students, if you ever wake up one day and you think, oh my gosh, you know what, I know it all, I've got this, you better be very worried because first of all, you're kidding yourself. You can't possibly know it all. And secondly, it means you stopped growing. You know, you have to always be learning something new, which is why I commend everybody on this webinar for taking the time to listen to me and the other speakers of this series, because, you know, hopefully you take little bits from here and there, and that's stimulating. That keeps you learning and keeps you updated with what's happening. And of course, sleep. Sleep has been shown to be extremely important. We know from humans that have sleep disorders that it leads to cognitive decline and increased chances of brain diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, et cetera. So folks with sleep apnea and other sleep disorders will have higher incidence of these things. This is a field that is extremely young in veterinary medicine. I don't think anyone is doing really good, robust research on sleep in veterinary medicine. We just kind of look at our dogs and they're sleeping and we think they're okay. And unless they have some severe issue with related to sleep, we never really think of it. So that's an area of future study, I think. But out of all of these, the one that is researched the most in veterinary medicine is nutrition. And let's look at that real quick. So the first thing I want to introduce is this concept of advanced glycation end products. Big word, what the heck does it mean? Well, it's also known as AGEs. And the human nutrition world is all about this right now. They've been doing research on this for the last 5 to 10 years, pretty robust research. We're pretty confident that we know what's going on. And what it is that when a fat or a protein gets processed at high temperature, they change. They become somewhat adulterated. There's a reaction called the Maillard reaction. And they change their shape and they fuse together. And maybe the next slide might be a little bit more visual. And so here you got your proteins, here you got your sugars, and with high temperature and time, so it's a function of time as well, they form these compounds that are known by several terms. Sometimes they'll call them Maillard reaction products. Sometimes they'll call them AGEs, advanced glycation end products. They have different names, but the point is that these sugars and proteins are fusing together at high temperature and forming these compounds. And these compounds accumulate in the food that's been processed, and then you consume it. And now what the research is showing is you can get an increase in your own body's AGEs dependent on dietary AGEs that you consume. So as I consume processed foods, what happens is the AGEs in those processed foods start seeping into my tissues. And they love to go to places that are vital organs like the heart, the liver, the kidney, the blood. You know, I'll go back to the previous slide. One of the most famous AGEs is something that we all have to monitor and watch. It's called hemoglobin A1C, right? Your HA1C. And at one point, it used to be thought, oh, that's a marker for diabetes. Once that gets really high, then you start getting into the pre-diabetic and diabetic state, and there's medications that they recommend you go on to try to neutralize them. But now what we're starting to realize is, oh my gosh, that's not a marker for diabetes. That's the cause. And it's building up in our blood from the food that we're ingesting that is riddled with advanced glycation end products. So why is it that now they can reverse type 2 diabetes with just diet, with just addressing diet alone? Is because we do have the ability to clear AGEs from our system after they built up. It's just so much harder to do that, and it takes so much longer than it takes to accumulate them. So you can accumulate them super easily, but then by eating cleanly for a long period of time, you start to finally start clearing them out, but it takes a while. And now what we're realizing with heart disease is that it's reversible with diet. Diabetes, reversible with diet. I've already told you the story of how my golden retriever Ray's kidney disease, we think, became super well managed. Because I'm a veterinarian, I have trouble saying reverse because that's not supposed to happen. And it's, my dog, and what are people going to say if I'm starting to tell people I'm reversing kidney disease? But I don't know how else to put it. His kidneys started working again. And by the way, I didn't finish that story. Ray's no longer with us because he ended up passing away, but he did so at the age of 17, and he did so in his sleep. I didn't have to euthanize him. In the end, his kidneys didn't go. He was 17, and he had a lot of achy joints, and he was on large amounts of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories in order for him to be able to walk. Because if I stopped the medication, he couldn't walk. And as we age, mobility is another issue. So he needed the meds to be able to be mobile, but the meds were being processed by his liver. So in the end, probably his liver gave out. But the point is, it wasn't due to his kidneys, which 4 or 5 years earlier, I thought that was going to be the reason he was going to be a goner. So we have the ability to clear these AGEs, but we are much better, unfortunately, currently at accumulating them through diet. And so this is why it's super important. This research that's being done, we already know for a fact that processed foods are linked to chronic disease. And now we believe that the mechanism for that linkage is these compounds here, these AGEs. And of course, what happens is these are proteins and carbohydrates that are not real proteins, or adulterated proteins and carbohydrates, but your body tries to use them like real proteins and carbohydrates. So it starts incorporating them into your tissues. And that, because it's adulterated, it's not a pure protein and it's not a pure carbohydrate, leads to inflammation. And so you get things like inflammatory bowel, you get things like plaque and inflammation in the brain. And it basically just starts breaking down your health little by little. And a lot of folks are looking into, it's all driven by nutrition. And it's pretty crazy, especially with what's going on right now in the pandemic. And you see all this coverage, and it just drives me crazy. There's a couple of people that have brought up the importance of nutrition, especially during a pandemic, and especially when you want to be able to have the strongest immune system in case, God forbid, you are exposed. And you know what? But not enough people are talking about the impact of nutrition. People are focusing on other things and masks and all that, all of which are important. But the foundation for health is nutrition, and no one's really looking into that, or at least not talking about it as much as they should be during this pandemic. So this is just another slide that talks about some of the research that has been linked to AGE and specific diseases in humans. And what's interesting is that in addition to this, we've also done digestibility studies. So we are partnered with a group of scientists that are now just getting ready to duplicate a lot of this AGE research in dogs. In other words, they're going to use our food. They're independently doing the research at the University of Georgia, but they're going to be using our food to compare the accumulation of AGEs for dogs that eat kibble versus our food versus raw, and then how do they clear them. And what's really cool is these are experiments that you can't really do on people, because you need people to abide by a certain diet for a certain amount of time, and you need to stick to it and all that, and you can't really do that with people. It's just, they're not reliable subjects for that kind of study, but you can do it with dogs. And we're really excited to be a part of it, and we think that 2 to 3 years from now, the results will be in. It'll be pretty transformative. And this is what it's going to take to shift the mind of the mainstream veterinarian onto fresh whole foods because they need research. Sonali, you'll appreciate, as a scientist, you need scientific proof. And sometimes, I chuckle at the fact that part of my job is to talk other veterinarians and convince them that real food, the same food you and I eat and that we can get at a grocery store, is healthier than a little brown pellet of processed feed grade leftovers from the human food chain. And so that's a little bit about what we talk about in Big Kibble is that journey of trying to partner with the right folks so that we can finally prove this out scientifically. And we're closer than ever before. And it's pretty exciting because you're not going to get the mainstream veterinarian making that shift until they see that research, even though, again, a lot of that research exists in human nutrition already. In addition, we also ran digestibility studies through the University of Illinois through Kelly Swanson. And what they did is they fed our food, fresh whole food, to dogs, and then they also fed them fresh pet, which is considered a fresh food, and they fed them a standard kibble, like it was actually blue buffalo. And they then they crossed them over and they saw like what their fecal output was. And they also measured things like microbiome and all that kind of stuff. And right now, Kelly Swanson has submitted that for publication. We expect it to be published probably by a month or two. But for now, what we have is the results. And so I can talk about those. And what they found was that while dogs ate more of our whole food by volume, they actually produced 55% less poop than kibble. They ate more actual food, but they produced 55% less poop. And that's probably the most robust evidence in favor of fresh whole food that exists today so far. I mean, obviously we're going to get the AGE research and all that later, but for now, just the fact that these dogs are eating to maintain their weight, and when they eat fresh whole food, they produce a lot less waste. You have to ask yourself, wait a minute, 55% less waste, that's less than half. So where did that waste come from? It's not coming out of the dog, right? So where is that waste coming from to make fecal output be double what it is if it's real food? It's coming from the fact that you're putting it in to begin with. And that stuff that we all know as kibble has so much waste in it that it's just going right through the dog, and the dog is having to process it, and then it has effects on the GI tract, and then it comes out the other end. And this is the most scientifically robust proof of that. And so this, we can't wait till it gets published. It should be published in the next month or so. We expect that this will hopefully make a big splash in the veterinary community because, again, a lot of this research hasn't been developed in veterinary medicine yet. This parallels with a study that has been done recently in humans. And what they did is they took folks and they fed them a processed version of a diet. And then they took another group and they fed them a whole food version of that same diet. And what they found was, and I'll show the next one, right? So you have the ultra processed diet and the unprocessed diet. And what they found was that they were eating the same, they were told to eat to maintain their weight, but because of the ultra processed diet, they actually ended up taking in more calories, right? And their weight over time increased. And the folks that ate an unprocessed diet actually consumed less calories, felt more full, and their weight went down over time. And we think that they think that this has to do with the way processed foods and AGEs interact with our insulin receptors and our satiety center in our brain, et cetera. But very, very interesting because it parallels, we now, with the research that has been done at the University of Illinois, we can now see that in dogs, it's very similar. When they have a unprocessed diet, they will regulate the intake of calories better than when they have an ultra processed diet. So this brings us to why we do things the way we do at Just Food for Dogs. This is footage from our various kitchens. What we are is a whole food nutrition center. We have kitchens all around the country and over now, I think 250 locations where we make the food in the kitchens, and then in the pantries, the other locations, we send the food for sale to those locations as well. And what we're doing is we're making food using all the same ingredients you and I eat. We use restaurant suppliers as opposed to feed grade pet food suppliers, which is what most pet food companies do. And through that, we've developed a line of whole food diets. We have 6 regular diets for healthy dogs. We have a feline recipe as well. And we have 8 prescription diets that veterinarians use to manage disease. And as a couple of our customers that are on this call mentioned, we also have a custom formulation service. Now, admittedly, when we first started this, we just thought, hey, this is a good idea. It's real food. Your dog is going to be doing better because it's real food. What we didn't realize is we were actually stumbling upon a movement, and that once the science caught up and once we had the resources to investigate things scientifically, we were going to discover things that not only confirmed stuff that's discovered in human nutrition, but changed the world for pets and our understanding of nutrition in veterinary medicine. So it's been an incredible ride. It's fantastic. You know, I can't say enough about the teams and the folks that I work with. I got the privilege of being surrounded by passionate pet people, and all they want to do is see you know, their pets get healthier, and we can achieve that through something very simple: what you're feeding them every day. This is sort of what the food looks like. You know, it's funny because sometimes I'll put these pictures and they're kind of meaningless because every pet food company puts a picture up like this. But in our case, this is actually what goes into the food. We cook everything, nothing's raw. So, you know, the only difference would be that this raw ground beef here would be cooked. But in the end, that's what you get. It's a fresh food diet. It's made with all the real ingredients that you would expect. The pictures that you see on the label from really well marketed pet food, unfortunately, in those cases, if it's a kibble, there's no real food in that food. And that's what we talk about in Big Kibble, is that their ability to deceive the public by putting pictures of carrots and apples on the bag, but then putting sort of rejected, you know, surplus food and moldy grains and all that into a renderer and an extruder and putting it all and baking it all into a little brown ball. That's what really happens. And that's what we talk about in the book. But in our case, we actually do use these ingredients. And by the way, this is not a plug for Just Food for Dogs. Like I said, we have competitors, and this is a good thing because competitors mean that more dogs are going to be healthier and that this food is made available to more dogs. So our competitors are folks like Farmer's Dog. They're online based. Most of our competitors are online based. We're the only ones doing it where you can walk into a kitchen and see the food being made. But My Ollie's another one. Nom Nom Now is another one. Pet Plate's another one. So there's a handful of them. We started in 2010. So we've been doing it the longest, and we sort of invented this way of doing it. But as of about 4 or 5 years ago, Farmer's Dog was the first one to kind of start the trend of competition, which is, again, a good thing, especially in our situation. I saw some questions when I first started the talk about how do I do this without breaking the bank? And I'm glad that you asked that, because we offer all of our 6 daily diets for healthy dogs in DIY, do-it-yourself home recipes. So you don't have to buy the food from us. That's not what we're trying to do. What we want you to do is consider switching your dog off of the processed food and onto something more wholesome, and we could provide you the recipes for doing it. So you can make it at home, and then what you do is you put the nutrient blend that helps balance it for long-term feeding. You don't even have to use our recipe. You can work with your veterinarian or veterinary nutritionist to develop your own recipe. That's what we do in our custom formulation service, for example. So it is something that is accessible. And then for some folks, if you have 2 big Great Danes, just supplementing the kibble with some fresh whole foods, as long as, again, it's properly balanced and it's an ingredient that's safe for dogs, has been shown to make a dramatic impact on their nutrition, because again, you're helping to offset some of those AGEs with clean, fresh food. So any little bit that you can add is pretty good. We talk about in the book this old adage that popped up right around the 60s. The Pet Food Institute, which is a trade organization for pet food, developed a campaign against people food. Why? Because it sells more kibble and canned food. And that's when they got into the heads of folks and veterinarians and everybody that people food is bad. And, you know, the only thing that you could feed your dog that's safe and healthy is that little brown pellet or a can. It was very successful. And from a business standpoint, you know, it's a very effective way to kind of change the minds of collectively of America and pet owners on human food. But what we now know is, yes, of course, there are certain human foods you want to avoid, certain fatty foods. What I like to tell people is, generally speaking, if it's not good for you, you shouldn't give it to them. But, you know, I favor a little baby carrot if your dog will eat it. Some dogs have grown up on more processed treats, right? And so it's hard to get them to go back. But, you know, only because I've already kind of knew what I learned from, the past, that when I finally got my current dog, Bruce, as a puppy, I introduced him to bananas, just fresh raw bananas. I introduced him to carrots. He likes blueberries and raspberries, so he likes fruits. And so that's a treat for him now. And you don't have to go buy anything from the store. You could just give him those, and they're healthier treats. For your own nutrition, this is true as well. You know, one of the things that I realized after finally reducing my reliance on processed foods and enjoying fruits more is your taste buds and your affinity to the natural sugars in just fruits transform over time. You know, in order for your taste buds to get tantalized, if you're used to processed foods, you got to have the Doritos or the hot Cheetos, right? But after a while of not having those, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, like biting into a grapefruit or having grapefruit as a late night snack is like the most wonderful thing in the world now. I remember when it was like, ew, fruit. Now it's like, oh my gosh, this is the best. So that has been my own personal journey. And I think it's similar for dogs, that they just love the whole food, especially if they're made to be used to it from the beginning. So if you ever want to give a healthy treat, and if it's early enough that your dog will still accept it, things like a slice of apple, a baby carrot, any of those things are perfectly good treats. In addition, there is some research to show there are supplements that are associated with cognition and brain health. And so these are things like medium chain triglycerides. So there are certain types of vegetable oils that have high levels of medium chain triglycerides. Now, I caution that we're still working on exact amounts, et cetera. So the last thing I want is for people to go home and put a big slab of coconut oil on their dog's food. That you don't want to do that, because coconut oil is very fatty, and it could, the wrong amount with the wrong dog could promote things like pancreatitis. So that's not what I'm saying. But what we are trying to figure out is, if I'm going to make a brain diet or a formulation that's good for the brain, then replacing or reducing my reliance on other fats and using coconut oil instead where I need fat might make a big difference. Omega-3 supplements, fish oil, have anti-inflammatory effects that are robustly researched both in human and veterinary cognition, as again, they help as antioxidants and clean up free radicals in the brain, which help offset that inflammation that again was caused by potentially the accumulation of AGEs. Arginine is an amino acid that has been looked at as being good for brain health. So has tryptophan, for example, and just B-vites in general. We know from a lot of research that has been done that B-vites, or supplementing your diet as you age with vitamins, B vitamins, is good for brain health as well. In addition, there's future areas for discovery between nutrition and all things GI and brain health. And so the microbiome is huge right now. And I know you guys will be having a talk with Animal Biome tomorrow, and they're going to go into more detail. The only caveat, if you want to call it that, is that we're very young right now in our discovery of this. So it's not all worked out. We are just starting to collect data on microbiome, and we're just starting to figure out what is healthy and what is not healthy, and how can you shift from one to the other based on diet. And so all that's being worked out, but we're happy to be part of that discovery, because again, our food is being used in some of these studies as we speak. Probiotics and prebiotics. I think everyone knows what a probiotic is. It's sometimes in pill form or in liquid. It's a concentration of beneficial bacteria that you can take that will then work in the gut to help aid digestion. And there have been links to helping with things like allergies and skin problems and all kinds of other things as well. But what prebiotics are essentially the food, the starches that those bacteria need in order to do their work in the gut. And so, the nice thing about using starches in our formulations is that they serve as prebiotics for the probiotics if you were to supplement the diet with probiotics. Plant-based diets are a big deal in human nutrition right now. I say this with caution because we do get every once in a while the request for a vegetarian or a vegan diet. So far, the research just hasn't been done. We're not comfortable, at least at Just Food for Dogs, making vegan diets. We think that until there is more research that is safe, that you need some animal protein. And so you could do egg and tofu, for example, and make a vegetarian diet. But there is pretty robust research in humans that AGEs tend to accumulate more in meats, especially meats that are processed. And so by going to a vegan or plant-based diet and limiting your intake of meats and processed meats, that's the fastest way to start clearing AGs from the system. And that's how they're starting to reverse things like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, et cetera. So I think this is an area of discovery for veterinary medicine in the future. No one has really started to do that work, but I can see that being the future. And then sometimes we get accused, especially with a title like Big Kibble in our book, right? We get accused of being anti-kibble, and that's not the case. What we are is anti-unhealthy kibble. There actually exists, the theoretical technology exists to neutralize AGEs in the diet. In other words, there is a processing technique that is theorized that can be done to kibble to neutralize AGEs. But no one's going to do that until you prove that they're there to begin with and that they're harming us to begin with. And so an area of future discovery is that through the work that we're doing and some of the investigations that are going on now, we might actually end up having a healthier kibble in the future. Now, you have to hope that neutralizing the AGEs doesn't have another secondary unknown effect, et cetera. But the only way we're going to get there is by proving out, what we're figuring out right now anyway, which is that there's a problem to begin with, and then how do we address the problem? So we're not anti-kibble, we're just anti-marketing kibble as it currently exists today as something that's healthy and beneficial for your dog when there is enough research and robust evidence to suggest otherwise. That's a lot of me talking, so I think I will pause there. This is a summary slide, but who has questions, discussions, anybody want to discuss?
Yes, so I think we do actually have a good number of questions, and I'm just going to pull out one or two that I think are most relevant to everyone, because I do know that you provided your email at the end that people can follow up with you and also with Just Food for Dogs. So I think the question that I saw repeatedly was around, one question was that came up a few times is around raw food, and if they're, what your thoughts are on that versus fresh food and processed food. If you could take a stab at that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so with respect to AGEs, there is now research to show, and it's veterinary research, and in fact, it was just debuted this past June in something called the American Academy of Veterinary Nutrition Symposium. It's once a year that they scientists get together and they look at the research that's being done. This one was virtual because of COVID, but they showed that raw foods, you know, contain a lot less AGEs as a baseline than kibble. And that is kind of makes sense. Now, it's not like raw food has no AGEs. Why? Because AGEs naturally occur as well. So, and remember, whatever the food source of the protein, so if it was a cow for beef or a pig for pork, whatever the food source, the livestock for that, whatever they're consuming dictates how much AGEs they accumulate in their tissue. And so it doesn't matter that it's raw, they still have AGEs accumulating in their tissue because AGEs are just a part of life. They do form. What we're trying to say is don't overwhelm the body with AGEs by consuming food that is just riddled in it, which is what kibble is shown to be. So with respect to raw food, there is research to suggest that the potential benefit when people go from kibble to raw, so far there has been no real understanding of why people swear by raw. They have observations where their dog is doing a lot better, but there's no real reason for it. Now we think that maybe has to do with the massive difference in the content of AGEs, and that makes sense. Now, the problem, or I don't know if it's a problem, but the other side of that coin is that raw isn't without its issues. Some of those issues are potential for bacterial contamination. Another one is that some people perceive raw food as being more wholesome because it's not processed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the ingredient sourcing is human edible. It is the same ingredient sources you would get at the grocery store or at a restaurant. In many cases, in fact, it's actually still the leftovers from the human food chain. It's just that instead of processing it, they leave it raw. And so there's still some facts, issues with raw that I think is going to keep the mainstream veterinarian from embracing it fully. But all of those issues are solved if you simply just cook the food. And we talk about the truths and myths about all kinds of concepts, including raw food. And it's just not true that by lightly cooking the food, the same you would cook in your own kitchen, that you kill any of the nutrition. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And we show actual printouts from the USDA in the book where we take a 6-ounce chicken breast that is cooked, compare it to a 6-ounce chicken breast that is raw, and we show that you actually get a concentration of nutrition because you, quite frankly, just burn off some of the fat in the water, right? And so you end up with a more concentrated form of nutrition. So you don't lose nutrition by cooking. Otherwise, we'd all be dead, right? We all cook our food at home. And so I think raw will prove out as being healthier than kibble, but I still think the long-term sustainable and more responsible methodology is going to be cooked fresh food.
Thank you. And folks, I know a few have mentioned that that you may have to take off because we're slightly over time. So feel free to do that because this is being recorded. We will take one more question, which again, I've seen a recurring theme around this. Folks are curious about supplementation and how to figure out how does a regular pet parent figure out what to supplement and can they test for it? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so you don't have to supplement vitamins or minerals if you're feeding a complete and balanced diet. In fact, in some cases, you don't want to. Supplementing calcium or phosphorus, for example, in an already complete and balanced diet could have the potential of giving too much calcium and could cause growth problems during the puppy stages. So you don't want to do that. And so if it's a reputable food that already has a nutrition in it, then you don't need to supplement vitamins and minerals. Now you might want to use dietary supplements for specific conditions, like fish oils for joint disease, or glucosamine chondroitin for joint disease and stuff like that. And those could be beneficial, but just as you can find research showing that they're useful, some research says that it's not. And so it really depends on the product that you choose. And I would just talk to your veterinarian about that. But you don't have to supplement a properly formulated recipe that you're making, or a complete and balanced food, at least not from the nutritional standpoint.
Thank you for that. So, folks, unfortunately, we do have to wrap up because we are at time. But Oscar, thank you so much for doing this. There's so many great comments in the chat. I don't know if you can see, but people are really loving this talk. We may have to have you come back. This was really great. And particularly, I'll say, and I saw this reflected in the comments, just being able to tie this back to human health. Our dogs really reflect our lives because they live so closely with us. So thank you for doing that in such an articulate way, because I think it's so much easier to remember when you relate your own personal lifestyle and routine to your little furry friend.
Yeah, I mean, we call them man's best friend, and the ultimate thing is they might actually teach us how to eat, which is so exciting, right? With what we're finding out, so it's pretty cool.
Yes, amazing. Thank you so much. Folks, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are supporting Social Teas Rescue and also Deli the Street Dog Foundation this entire week. So, by attending today, tomorrow, and the rest of the week, you are supporting these two fabulous nonprofit organizations that help animals in need. So please continue to come to other days as well. Tomorrow we have, Dr. Chavez already mentioned, we have Holly Gans. She's a PhD microbiologist from Animal Biome, and she's going to talk about gut health, which I think will be a great complement to this talk, actually. And then the day after, we have Petminded's resident dog scientist talking about dog cognition, and we'll play some dog cognition games so you guys can sort of end the week with some cognitive enrichment. And those are fun. So, if you want to bring a glass of wine or something, please do. It's more like playtime for us in any case. And I did promise a code. So that is up here. We'll drop that in the chat as well. If you guys are interested in signing up for the program, you can do that at this link, but also, feel free to email me if you have any questions about it. Happy to answer. And yes, Danielle, I did say wine. It is Friday, so you are welcome to bring a glass of wine. I will send out instructions for the game tomorrow morning, so look out for the recap email, because we'll share, what materials you need to play the game. But it should be a great way to end out this week, which has been, I hope, to everyone, evidence that science can be really fun too. And when you're learning with other like-minded people and learning from great experts, it can be a really enjoyable experience. So thank you again, Oscar. I really, really appreciate you doing this, and to your team for supporting Dog Science Week. It means a lot to have folks give their time and expertise and share their knowledge with all of us. Someone is looking for the applause emoji. I think if you go down to reactions, Julie, you can applaud there. Oh no, they removed it. You could use a heart if you wanted to show appreciation. But also, if anyone has questions, I can stick around for a few minutes. I'm happy to do that because I know a few people have emailed me, and I'm still getting through my emails. So I'm seeing a few other comments. Everyone says thank you. Tatiana, thank you for dropping the link for the program in the chat. There's more great testimonials for Just Food for Dogs. I might screenshot these and send these over to you.
Oh, I never
Um,
get used to them. They're awesome.
and thank you, Tennille. Appreciate all the compliments. um, and I think that's it, guys. So if no one has any further questions, we'll hopefully see everyone tomorrow night. Thanks again for joining. And then please look out for the email in the morning. I will include information on Just Food for Dogs, and I'll include information on how you can get the free copy of Dr. Chavez's book. But other than that, have a great night. Bye. Thanks again for joining us.
Go ahead. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, hi. Hi, I live in New York City and I have a 12-year-old rescue that I adopted when he was 8.